everyone, welcome to my session. I'm going to be talking today about building Unity games using TeamCity. So let's get started. First of all, I'm going to create a new project in Unity, and I'm going to store this in a workspace I've created in Perforce. So over in P4V, I have a depot called Unity Games and a workspace under my user directory called Unity Games also. So if I jump back to Unity Hub, I can create a new project. And for this, I'm going to call this game my super awesome game. I'm going to save this in the Unity Games folder. And I'm going to create this from an existing template. So I'm going to select the 2D platformer micro game and click create. This will go ahead and create a new project. It will resolve all of the packages, bring those in, and create the project for us. Okay, so now the game has been created in Unity. So we can, let me maximize this. And I'll also close the tutorial section on the right here and expand the canvas. Now this game comes with a sample scene, which I can expand here, and we can select one of the views, so from the player view. And if you're not familiar with this sample game in Unity, essentially you have a player that can go along this environment and collect these tokens, which are these yellow or gold diamond-shaped tokens. And we can preview what this game looks like directly inside of Unity by clicking the play button up here. And then we can just run through the game, and you can see you can collect these tokens and avoid the enemies. So quite a simple game, but quite interesting. So one of the first things I want to do is add this game into Perforce. I want to store this code because we then want to set up the project inside of TeamCity. So to add the project to Perforce, I go to the Edit menu, Project Settings, and under here I can select Version Control, and we'll change the mode over to Perforce. This is one of the built-in integrations offered in Unity. And I'm going to enter my credentials, so my username for Perforce, my password, and the workspace, which will be Unity Games, and the server, and that's where Perforce is currently running. So I'll click the connect button, and that connected fine. So we'll close that. And on the window menu, I can go to Asset Management, Version Control to bring up the version control menu. And I'll add this as a tab down here just so it's easily accessible. And if we expand that, we can see all of the files that will be added if I was to check this into source control. So I can actually go ahead and click Submit. And I'll call this my initial commit. And that's submitted successfully. And if I go over to P4V, I can go to Depot, click Refresh, and we can see the super awesome game now shows up in Perforce. One of the things I want to do though is, in order for TeamCity to detect that this is a Unity project, there are a couple more files that need to be checked in. So I'm actually going to, inside of the P4V, I'm going to add the whole super awesome game folder. So I'm going to mark that for add. And I've already defined a global P4 ignore file. So we're not worrying about checking any of the library files, any of the packages, the temp folder. That will just take up extra space on the server. So we can see all of the ignored files here. So I click OK. And there are also some files with wildcards which we'll exclude as well. And then if I go over to the depot folder again, click refresh. Okay, so if I click submit, I can call this my initial commit again. Click submit. Okay, so now we have the entire project checked into Perforce. I can refresh, we can see all of the required files for this game and now stored on Perforce. And one of the next things I want to do is, in order for TeamCity to trigger a build of this game, I want to create a C# class file that will define the two types of builds I want to create. The first one will be a macOS build of this game, and the second one will be a WebGL version of the game which I can play inside the web browser. In order to do that, what I can do is go to the Assets menu and open this C# project, and this will cause the Rider IDE to be opened. I have this installed on my machine, and this will open up the Unity project inside of Rider, and we'll just wait for that to load. Okay, so the project has opened up inside of Rider, and in the folder structure here we can see there is an editor folder which has an existing class file, C# class file already in there. So I can right click on this folder and go to add a new class, and I'm going to call this my game builder class, and it will go ahead and create that new C# file, and I'm going to actually paste in some code I prepared earlier. And essentially what this is doing is we have a class called Game Builder, and it contains two methods, one called perform macOS build and the other called perform WebGL build. And what these do, the macOS one, if we look at this one first, we define which scenes we want to include in the build. I've also defined the output path, so it's going to generate an application called Super Awesome Game, which exists under the build macOS folder. I've also defined the target as being a standalone OS X or standalone macOS game. And then down here, the build player takes those options and generates a build based on those configurations. And then further down, if we look at the WebGL build, it is a very similar thing. It takes the list of, or the array of scenes. We define a output path, which is build/WebGL. I've defined the target as WebGL as well, and it proceeds with the build of the game. And also, if you look, there's a attribute tagged onto each of these methods, which adds a menu item inside of the Unity UI. So we've added menu items for both of these methods, which means both of these methods can be called directly inside of Unity. So if I jump back to the Unity IDE, we can see that there is a new build menu, and I can build a macOS version of the game or a WebGL version of the game just through those new menu options at the top of the screen. But we want to run this build inside of TeamCity. So in order to do that, I want to first of all check in my latest changes, because we can see that Unity has detected that new Game Builder class. So I can right click on here and submit those changes, and I'll just say I've added the Game Builder class and click submit. And now if I jump over to TeamCity, I've got TeamCity running on my local machine here. So this is my local host version of TeamCity. I have one project in here at the moment just called Hello World. I'm not going to go into that one today. I'm going to create a completely new project for this game. And in order to do that, I click on the New Project button in the upper right corner. And the nice thing with TeamCity, if you just type in the URL, it will figure out how to connect. So if I type in the repository URL, which will be Perforce, and then the host name or IP address where Perforce is running, and it'll be under Depot, and it'll be called Super Awesome Game. And I authenticate again, and click proceed, and this will connect to Perforce, and we can see it's picked up the repository, so I can just change the name to Super Awesome Game. And when you create a new project in TeamCity, it also creates a new build configuration, and the build configuration could be for building a macOS game, it could be for building a WebGL game, and the build configuration contains one or more build steps, which I'll show shortly. But for this first build configuration, I'm going to rename this because I want this to be for building my macOS version of the game. So I've changed the name and click proceed. And TeamCity has auto detection built in for detecting the types of build steps you might need based on the code that is inside of the repository. So it scans this repository in Perforce, and it's detected that it's a Unity game. And because I have the Unity plugin installed in TeamCity, it suggested the Unity build step. And you can tell which plugins you've got installed if you go to the administration section and go to the plugins area. You can see a list of all of the plugins that are installed, and you can see Unity support listed here. And this is a JetBrains developed plugin. And if you want to install this on your own TeamCity server, if you just head over to plugins.jetbrains.com and search for Unity support, you can then download that zip file and upload it inside of the TeamCity plugins area. So jumping back to my super awesome game, we can see if I jump to the build configuration for building the macOS app, I can start to edit the configuration settings. Now when this build is running, it's going to be producing an artifact, and that artifact is going to be the built version of the macOS game, so it's going to be a .app file. And I need to tell TeamCity that I want to zip up the contents of the folder where the macOS app resides and store that zip as an artifact inside of TeamCity. So on the build configuration settings, I've scrolled down to the artifact paths, and I'm telling TeamCity to grab the contents of the macOS folder and zip that up into game macOS.zip, and that will be stored as an artifact so we can download it or use it in subsequent build configurations. So I'll save that change, and then the next thing I want to do is add a build step, because we need to tell TeamCity what it needs to do in order to run the build. You can either do the auto detection, or let me just go ahead and add the Unity step manually. And there are only a couple of things I need to define on here. First of all, I need to tell it which method to execute inside of my game builder class. So all I need to do for that is specify the class name, which is game builder, and then reference the method name inside of my game builder class. So I can just copy the perform macOS build method and paste that in there. Don't need any brackets, just do game builder.perform macOS build. The other thing I want to do as well under the command line arguments, in order for TeamCity to see the output from the Unity CLI, I just do log file and a dash, and we'll save those changes. And then under the triggers, TeamCity by default has a VCS trigger. I want to delete this because I'll show you shortly I'm going to create a build chain or a build pipeline. So I'm going to be linking several build configurations together. And I want to have just one VCS trigger on the final build configuration in my build chain, because the way TeamCity works is if you define a VCS trigger at the end of the build chain, it will automatically trigger all of its dependent build configurations based on what the changes are or whether anything can be reused. So I'll delete this default VCS trigger. So now we've got the one build configuration for building the macOS version of the application. So I'll go ahead and create a second version of, a second build configuration. So if I jump back up to my project, I can click on the Create Build Configuration button. I'm going to choose the manual option because we already have a VCS route defined at the project level. And I'm going to call this new build configuration build WebGL. And click Create. And I can choose to attach an existing VCS route. You can see it's listed the Perforce repository that's defined on the root project. And again, it's going to auto detect the build steps. You can either wait for that or click cancel, and you can just add the build steps manually, which I'm going to do now. So I'm going to choose Unity again, and this time I'm going to do game builder, and I'm going to reference the WebGL build method. And again, the additional command line argument for log file. And then jump into the general settings of the build configuration. I need to define the artifact paths again, so I can just add in the location of the WebGL game, which will be under the build folder in a subfolder called WebGL. I'm going to grab the contents of that folder and add it to a zip file called game.webgl.zip. Okay, so we've now got two build configurations. This is going to actually generate our builds. So rather than developers running the builds on the individual machines, they can check in their changes and TeamCity will automatically build the game and also store the artifacts for future reference. And that's quite useful if you want to maybe replicate a issue in an older version of the game, or just share builds with your team. The final thing I want to do is deploy a WebGL version of the game to an external service. So I have a S3 bucket that's set up as a website, and I want to copy my WebGL files all the way over to S3. So the last build configuration I'm going to create is for the deployment of the WebGL game. So I'm going to call this the deploy WebGL. And because this is deploying artifacts, I'm going to choose the deployment build configuration type. Okay, and under here, I can go ahead and add some of the necessary configurations. The first thing I'll do is add a build step, and this is going to execute the AWS CLI to copy the WebGL files, the index page, and all of the assets for the game in order to run. I will copy all of that over to the S3 bucket. So I have the AWS CLI installed on my build agents that are used by TeamCity. So I can just go ahead and add a command line build step. And I can copy in some steps I prepared earlier. So I've got 3 items inside of this custom script. I've got the first one, which will sync the contents of the game folder, which I will add as a dependency shortly, and it will sync the contents of that folder over to the S3 bucket defined here. The second entry will actually remove the files that have a gzip extension, because I want to, or rather I need to, define a content encoding type on the gzip files, and this ensures that when the website that's being rendered on the S3 bucket is actually passing down the correct content encoding types for the gzip files. So I'll go ahead and save that. And one of the next things I need to do is define the VCS root again. So let me attach a VCS root, and I can just choose the project VCS root. I also want to define a trigger, and I'll choose the VCS trigger. So there are different triggers you can choose from. So if you want to do maybe a nightly scheduled build, you can do a scheduled trigger, but I'm just going to choose a VCS trigger. So whenever a change is detected in Perforce, TeamCity will detect those changes and automatically run a new build. The next thing I want to do is create my build chain, and this is also referred to as a build pipeline. And in order to create that build chain, you go to the dependencies section of a build configuration and you define its dependencies, so what this build configuration is dependent upon. And to define the build chain, I add the snapshot dependencies. So you can see I've got my super awesome game here, and I'm going to choose the build macOS and the build WebGL build configurations, and that creates the build chain, which can be visualized by clicking on the build chain link here. And because the macOS build and the WebGL build have no dependency on each other, TeamCity automatically figures out that those builds can actually run in parallel. So rather than waiting for the macOS build to finish before the WebGL build starts, those can be run in parallel, and that will be handled automatically by TeamCity. And then we've got our final build configuration here that deploys the WebGL game, and that depends on both of these, but it's going to wait until the WebGL build is ready before it then deploys it to the S3 bucket. The last thing I want to do is define the artifact dependencies, because in order to publish the WebGL game, this build configuration needs to have a copy of the zip file that was created under that build configuration. So to do that, I need to define the build configuration I'm grabbing an artifact from. So I'm going to choose the build WebGL build configuration. I'm getting artifacts from a build in the same chain. And the artifact rules, I'm going to define the name of the WebGL zip file, and I'm going to automatically extract that zip file into the game folder. And that game folder is what we're syncing to the S3 bucket using the AWS S3 commands. So I'll click save on that. And then if we jump back up to the projects, we can see we've got my super awesome game. I've got my 3 build configurations. And if I click the deploy button, this will automatically run the macOS build, the WebGL build. And once those are both finished, that will then deploy the game, the WebGL game, to S3. So we'll wait for this to finish. It will take quite a few minutes for the first build, but we'll come back shortly when this is finished. Okay, so we've got the first version of the game built. I manually triggered this in the TeamCity UI, and let me show you what's actually been produced and recap what we've done. So under the game, because a build has now been run, we can go to the build chains tab and see our first build chain. We can see that all 3 build configurations were successful, indicated by the green check mark. We can also see which build agent each of the builds was executed on. And if I go back to the project itself, on the right hand side of the screen, you can see the artifact icons, and that indicates that there's an artifact associated with this particular build. For the macOS version of the game, if I download this zip, I'll just save this onto my desktop. And if we open up this game, this is what the experience looks like on a desktop. So we've got the player, you can see the tokens that can be collected. But it'd be good to make this game a bit more interesting. So what I'm thinking of doing is actually changing all of the tokens that we see. So all of these diamond-shaped tokens that you can collect, I'm thinking of changing those for TeamCity tokens. So let me close this game, and we'll go back to the Unity interface. Now I've already created an asset or a sprite that will be used for the TeamCity token. So if I go to my PNG image I prepared earlier, we can see I've got 15 versions of the TeamCity logo that I've added into a single PNG file. And each of these TeamCity logos has a gradually increasing in size flash or just a random graphic, just so I can use this for the purposes of an animation. So you can see it gradually increases in size and then decreases, and this will be looped inside of Unity. In order to add this sprite inside of Unity, if I go back to the project and go to the sprites folder, I'm going to add the image in there. I can do this by dragging and dropping the image over, and we can see down here we've got the TeamCity token image. Now in order to configure this sprite, first of all I need to configure a 2D sprite editor in this project. So under the window menu, if I go to Package Manager, what we can do is browse the available packages and choose their 2D sprite editor. So if we just choose 2D Sprite, install that, and that will enable the editor for this project. Okay, so the 2D Sprite editor has been installed, and if I go back and click on my TeamCity token PNG image again, on the settings for this sprite, rather than it being a single image, I want to choose multiple because this PNG contains multiple sprites. I can then click on the Sprite Editor button, and this will launch the Sprite Editor. And now we need to tell Unity what the different boundaries are for each of the images inside of this sprite. So I'm going to choose Automatic Detection and then click the Slice button. And you can see it's added borders around each of the sprites. So if I click on apply, that now creates our that gives us our animation that we can use inside of the various tokens in the game. And if you click on the expand icon here, you can see the different frames inside of this sprite. And in order to apply this to my game, what I want to do is in the hierarchy, if I go to tokens and if I select one of the tokens, you can change its properties, you can change the sprite that's being used. So I'm going to select all of my tokens. And under the sprite here, we can select the initial sprite that is shown. And I'm going to search for my TeamCity token and just choose the very first frame. Now this is quite a large token in comparison to what was there before, so let me scale this down to 0.5 on both the X and the Y axes. And then the next thing to do is to set up the animation. And in order to do that, we can go down to the idle animation on the right hand side here, and you can define all of the different frames that will be used for this animation. So I have a total of 15 frames, so I'm going to define 15 here, hit enter, and that creates the extra elements. Now I'm not expert in Unity, so I'm not sure if this is the quickest way of doing it, but if I just drag and drop the different frames from the project here over to the inspector, that allows me to define the animation. So let me just select the tokens again. And I can drag and drop the sprites I want to use. Okay, so now we've defined all of the different elements for the animation. So I can go ahead and save that. And under the version control section, we can see that there are a few modified files. We can also see the scene has been updated. We can see the TeamCity token.png file that I added into this project. So now that I've saved the changes, I can right click and submit those changes, and I'm going to say I've changed the tokens and then click submit. And if we go back to the TeamCity user interface, after a few seconds, we will see a pending change detected by TeamCity, and we can see that shows up here. And we can actually see all of the commits that have been detected. And now both the macOS and the WebGL build is running. So if we click on the link here, this will actually take us to the running build, and we can preview the log file as the build is running. So if we go to the build log tab, and this is a nice rich build log, it groups all of the parts of the log by the different sections. If you have multiple build steps, you have multiple areas of the build log that you can expand and collapse. And we can monitor all of the different steps if we wanted to. Under the Changes tab, we can see the full list of changes. If I want to see which files were changed, I can click on that and see the changes. If there are file types that you are maybe text-based and you want to compare them, you can actually click on the files and see a side-by-side comparison. For this one, it's not so useful, but that capability is there if you want to compare the before and after state of a particular file. So we can see, if we jump back to the project screen, we've got the macOS build that has completed successfully, the WebGL build that's completed successfully, and I've also deployed the WebGL version of the game. So first of all, let's download the new version of the game. So if I go to Artifacts, and let me save this new version of the game. Again, I'll save that to my desktop. And we'll load up version 2 of this game. And we need to do this twice because it's not a verified game. And now when we jump back, the game is much more interesting because we've now got TeamCity tokens that we can collect rather than boring diamond-shaped tokens. So this kind of shows how cool TeamCity is, how quick it is to configure a Unity game and how you can make a quick change inside of the Unity editor. Obviously, I'm not a gaming expert, but this just kind of shows the flexibility that you have when you have something like TeamCity to automate your builds. And then lastly, we've got the WebGL version of the game, which has been published to my S3 bucket, which is running as a website. So if I navigate to that game in the browser, we get the exact same experience only inside of my browser instead. And I can go ahead and collect more TeamCity tokens, or I can die because I'm not very good at gaming. So that's how you can build games inside of TeamCity using Unity and Perforce. I hope you found this session interesting. Feel free to ask any questions and be happy to help. Thank you.